Good to go? Okay. Bismillahi walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and peace be upon you all. Welcome. I see some new faces here today. Glad to have you all with us, alhamdulillah. So we'll continue inshallah in the series of awakening and transforming, and today I want to talk a little bit more about the barriers that keep us from growing, from healing, from transforming. Because when we talk about transformation, it's not enough about learning, what we need to learn. Of course, learning is part of that process, but more importantly, what we often miss is the unlearning component, right? That transformation and growth is not so much about learning the new, but more about unlearning the old. So it's both. And so what do we have to unlearn? What do we have to tackle? What do we have to break in order to actually reach our goals, in order to find greater peace inwardly? What barriers do we have to break in order to see actual changes in our life? And I emphasize this a lot, where it's not enough to just know things. We have to actually be assessing knowledge that I'm gaining in my life. Is it actually, am I seeing changes in my life? Am I seeing the fruits of what I'm learning in my day to day? Meaning, how am I living each day differently? Are my prayers improving? Are my interactions improving? Do I feel lighter going about the day spiritually? So we have to look for signs, actual signs in our behaviors, not just be satisfied with, oh, I know this. And I think this is the problem of our world, right? We're too satisfied with just knowing things. We're like, oh, I know this, that's enough. But self-awareness is not enough. And I spoke about this last week, about how, having information is not enough. And so we have to always be looking out for what are some of the things that are standing in the way of me changing. And I want to first open it up, for reflection, with you guys, and see what you think are some of the barriers. And it could be from your own life or from what you've witnessed in others. What do you think are some of the most common barriers to actually growing and actually getting out of our own way and breaking some of the cycles of unhelpful habits or behaviors? What are some of the barriers that come to mind? Yeah. Fear? Absolutely. That's a really good one. Yeah. Fear is huge. Anybody else? Yeah. Ego, absolutely. Okay, so, and they're both related. Yeah. How about you guys? Anything? No? No barriers? All right. So barriers are definitely, there's so many, right? But today I want to just highlight a few that I think are really important when it comes to change. And some of the things that I see common in my work, things that I find keep people in unhelpful cycles where they feel like they know they want to change, they know they have to change, they see the problem clearly, but what's keeping them? Okay. And for some people who don't know the problem, that is the problem. It's denial of the problem. This is also very common, right? Where people actually are avoiding or not coming to terms or refusing to acknowledge that there is a problem. And so denial is the first one I want to talk about, where many people avoid facing the truth to avoid something else. There's a reason why people avoid facing their truths, the difficult truths. What are they avoiding? Discomfort, pain, agitation, anything that would disturb their nafs. Because the nafs is this ego-containing self. It's this lower self that's always driven by desires and comfort and pleasure, right? So of course, the second you face your truths, that's when the nafs gets uncomfortable. Like, what are you doing? Do you ever, when you're in a conversation and you start talking about you're having a good time, and then someone mentions, I don't know, the akhirah or something, or like someone mentions the day of judgment. They're like, some people might be like, what are you doing? Like, we were having a good time. Why do you have to be so morbid? It's interesting actually that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says that he tells us to remember death frequently, for it's the destroyer of pleasure, right? Many people think that, I used to think this too when I first heard this, like, oh, so like it's supposed to destroy all our joy, all our happiness, right? And that's why it can be confusing, right? If you take things in such absolute ways or you don't really understand them. But it's interesting, the word pleasure, because it destroys the comfort of the nafs. Doesn't destroy your peace entirely as a human being. Actually, when you remember death and you remember how temporary this world is, you actually get more at peace, because you give now attention to what is truly important, and you realize what truly matters, and you start letting go of what doesn't matter. You stop carrying what no longer serves you. But it destroys the comfort of this lower self. It destroys the comfort of the part of you that always wants to be in comfort, that doesn't want to remember truth, that doesn't want to be connected to reality, that is totally okay with being deluded in illusion, right? Or immersed in illusion as long as it's comfort. You see, the lower self, the nafs, doesn't care if you are being truthful or not. It just cares if you're comfortable. So it will choose comfort at the expense of authenticity, of you growing, of you healing, of you being truthful. And I talked about, in the first 2 sessions, I talked about, what do we need to root ourselves in order to transform? What is an ingredient that needs to be there that we can't grow without? Anybody? Starts with T. What'd you say? Yeah, taqwa, yes, but no, that's not what I'm looking for. Something else. Truth. You cannot grow in the absence of truth. Nothing can truly flourish or thrive or grow. You can't heal, you can't change, you can't transform in the absence of truth. So that's why people who are in denial cannot grow, because they're not actually rooting themselves in what is true. And so the first thing that we need to really assess is, how comfortable are we in facing our own truths, even the difficult ones, especially in our times. We live in a time that promotes denial. You know what we do in our today's times? You have a problem, let's package it so beautifully so it's no longer a problem. Rather than actually say, no, that is a problem. No, that is an illness. No, that is an issue. No, that actually does have harmful effects. No, that's okay. We need to be, that's okay. We're like, normalize it. But in essence, it's denial. It's denial of truth. And so you always have to assess, what am I denying in my life? Like, look at the areas that haven't been growing. The things that you've been trying to change for so long that you find yourself in the same cycle. You find yourself self-sabotaging. You find yourself unable to progress, unable to move forward. What is something I'm not facing? What am I in denial of? What are some difficult truths I'm not willing to say to myself? And how am I lying to myself? We all can lie to ourselves. We all can say, oh, that's not a big deal, but it is. Because why do we do that? Because we don't want the nafs to be agitated. It's like, when a child goes to a parent and they're upset, if the parent is not comfortable sitting with difficult emotions themselves, what is the first thing they're going to try to do when they see their child have uncomfortable emotions or difficult emotions? Mm-hmm. I heard shut down.
Yeah, shut down.
You just try to shut it down, right? Like, don't cry. Don't feel that way. Why? You have no reason to feel that way. Or they try to soothe the child immediately. Here, I'll give you some ice cream. Here, play with this toy. I'll buy you a new toy. Do you want that toy? Okay, I'll get it for you. Or I'll, just immediately try. Do you want to watch something? Especially today with the iPads. One of the most difficult struggles of a lot of parents is, getting their kids off the iPad or getting their kids not addicted to these things. But also, if you think about it, it's our own difficulty dealing with our own nafs, our own egos and our own lower selves and our own desire to constantly need to be comfortable that has also led to this issue. Now, parenting is very difficult, and we should never, like, of course, judge parents. Every parent is doing their best, but I think that that's something we need to keep in mind. How much is my nafs also playing a role in how I am parenting my child? And this is why the work we do on ourselves is so important, because it allows us to also not project or continue the cycle of teaching the next generation to constantly escape discomfort. So when a parent is not comfortable with their own emotions, they'll try to immediately eliminate any difficult emotion for their child. Now, the reason I give this example is because I always compare a child to the nafs. You'll find me doing this a lot, because I really do think that the nafs is very childlike. It's always like, no, I want that. I want this now, instant gratification. And so our job is to parent our own nafs. And through parenting our own nafs, we can learn to parent, future generations. And it's continuous work. You don't just, you become a parent, then that's it. You don't parent your nafs. You always have to keep parenting your nafs, right? But the nafs will always come up once you start to change. Once you start to actually face difficult truths. And this is why many people go years of their lives not facing difficult truths, not changing, not growing. I have sat with people in therapy who their first time coming to therapy was in their 60s or 70s, which is amazing, by the way, that there's nothing wrong with that, right? But it's learning from these examples has taught me how the nafs could play such a crucial role in keeping people from change. Of course, everybody's situation is different. It could be the stigma of mental health, right, in different communities. But I've sat with people where it wasn't the stigma of mental health that kept them from changing. It was, I can't face these truths. I can't face these pains. I can't be uncomfortable. And so we live in a time more than ever. I'm telling you, we think we live in a time where we're like, of course, we've progressed in so many ways. And of course, we've learned things that maybe the older generation didn't have or didn't know. But there's also a lot of things we're losing that they have. There's also a lot of values that we're losing that they have. So I don't really like a lot of the lingo out there about how, it's very an absolute way, like we're the better generation, the older generation is just like there's nothing to take from them. I don't like that kind of dialogue that dismisses all the values that those who are older than us have to offer us and we have to learn from. And I actually think they did a better job in sitting with discomfort in many ways than we do. What do we do when things are broken? We're uncomfortable with waiting. We're uncomfortable with actually giving something time to be fixed. That's why divorce rates are at an all-time high. Because if there's agitation, if there's discomfort, there's a door out. Escape. So we have to really be aware. Denial is not so much so that it's not in the way that we always think, oh, I have a problem and I'm not facing it. Denial could also be in the little moments of I'm denying, myself the opportunity to grow. I'm denying myself the opportunity to tame my nafs right now. I'm denying myself the opportunity to sit with discomfort and to actually give my heart a chance to grow. Because you see, when you deprive the nafs, the heart thrives. There's this interesting, and I've talked about my heart over mind and ego method, where I teach about the relationship between the heart and ego. And one of the things that I emphasize is that if you want your heart to grow, spend just a week saying no to your nafs. Spend just a day saying no to your nafs. And it's so interesting because we talk about, in our world today, we talk a lot about boundaries with others. Learn to say no to others. That's a superpower, right? How many of us have mastered the superpower of saying no to our own nafs? A lot of the self-help material out there, it orients the person outside of them. Like, place your control outside of you, control others, or like, I'm not saying boundaries are really important, but I'm saying that there's this emphasis on go outward before you go inward. But actually true growth is about going inward before you go outward. And if you are unable to say no to your nafs, you will not be able to change no matter how many boundaries you place with other people. If you are unable to say no to your nafs every single time it tells you, I want this, I'm uncomfortable, I need this right now, and you can't say no, you can't put boundaries with your own lower self, with your own egos, with your own, desire containing instant gratification wanting self, it doesn't matter how strong you are at saying no to other people. You're just putting walls around you, but actually not transforming within you. So the greatest superpower, I think, is really being able to master our own inner world. And Imam al-Ghazali, rahimahullah, he says this. He says that the happiness of a person is in mastering his own ego. Because it's in that overcoming, it's in that ability to master yourself, your nafs, especially your nafs, that you actually find happiness. We often think that the more I can control outside of me, the more happy I become. Actually, the more that you can control within you, the more happier you become. Because you just feel more power. And if you think about it, we lose joy when we lose power. When we think like, of course, our power is, limited, right? In so many ways, and Allah is the most powerful, but Allah does give us the ability to have power over certain things. And in fact, when we connect to that, what do I have power over? We feel this sense of grounding. Whereas if you start focusing on all the things you don't have power over, what do you end up feeling? Disempowered. What else? What is a big issue today that so many people are struggling with? Because they feel powerless or at the mercy of the next moment. Starts with an A. Man, you guys wouldn't be good at hangman. I feel like, what'd you say? Anxiety. Yeah, anxiety, right? So that's a big problem of today, and we don't realize how much it's rooted in our tendency to try to, how much it's rooted in powerlessness. Because we are so focused on that which we can't control, that which we don't have power over. Even the concept of tawakkul. Tawakkul is about trusting in Allah's power. But what do we always say? Tie your camel first. Why is that a concept? Why is it that we see in the way that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ exemplified tawakkul? It was, we see how he took all the steps first. He did his part first, put all his effort in, and then left the rest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why do we have that component? So that we can take back our power. So that we can focus on what we can control. So that we can tell ourselves that I did my best. I put forth my best effort. That's what gives comfort to people. Like have you ever had a situation with someone, and you were at a gathering and you felt like tension, or there was conflict or whatever, and you go back, or communication wasn't helpful, and you go back to your home and you're thinking about all the things that person said. And what do you feel as a result of it? More anxious? Can you sleep? Probably not, right? You're still thinking, or you're distressed. You get more distressed. The more you think about what the other person did, the more distress you experience. But what happens when you start saying, well, let me just assess, what did I say and what did I do in that situation? Okay, well, this is what I said. This is what I did. Okay, now you assess, was any of that, wrong or displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Was any of that hurtful to the other person? And let's say you assess and you're like, no, I didn't say anything hurtful. I just expressed how I felt. And then the situation escalated, or whatever it is. Or you realize, oh man, you know what? I actually could have said that better. You actually start to feel less anxious. You know why? Because you started to focus on what you can control. You filtered out the noise. Because that's what overwhelms the nervous system. That's what overwhelms us internally. is that now there's so many pieces and we don't know which piece, you know, we have power over. And we don't know where to start. You know, it's like the same thing with like the to-do list, or like you have all these things to do. You have all these pieces in front of you. But the second you hone in on just one piece or one part of the to-do list, what do you start to feel? I can do this. Okay, I got this. You know, I feel like I feel like it more hopeful. And so focusing on that which is outside of us too much is not the doorway to your healing, to your growth, to your empowerment, to you being, you know, a transformed person on any level. So take inventory of yourself and ask yourself, what is in my power? And I always emphasize this because many of us, we start big and we don't even realize that we're not honing in on something we can actually do. Like even when we set like goals, sometimes those goals don't translate into actual actions you can take today. And so the more you turn inward and you assess what you can do, how you can shift your heart, how you can turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how you can do one deed today that is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how you can sit with yourself and reflect, how you can, anything that you can identify that you can do, all the ways that you can say no to your nafs, you will find your heart becoming more nourished and you will find yourself more empowered to do more good. But the more you put your power in other people's hands and you tell yourself this narrative that I will only be happy if this person changes or if that changes outside of me, you actually delay your joy and peace. And this is what's happening in today's world. You know, people will fix one issue, they'll have anxiety over that, and then they'll think, oh, it won't be resolved until this person says sorry, or this situation, or I resolve this conflict. But then that's resolved, then they pay attention to something else. It's like we live in a time where people are wired to be hypersensitive to that which is outside of them, and to depend their security on that which is outside of them. Oh, now another person said something. Oh, that was hers. Oh, this person triggered me, or this person. It's too much. What are you going to do? Walk this earth and try to tell everyone how to talk, how to speak, how to act? It's impossible. That itself is going to burden you. That itself is going to create your own anxiety. And when I work with parents, I see this, you can't even do that with your own children to a certain degree, right? Like you can't, like that would be, you would suffocate them. Of course, if someone's being abusive, that's a different scenario. And I always talk about the difference between, you know, just in case there's any new people here, you know, the difference between someone triggering you, but it's not abusive. Because people could trigger you and it's not abusive. They don't mean to abuse you, and they're not actually being abusive. They're not verbally abusive. They're not physically abusive. They're not saying it with the intention to hurt you, but because of your own psychology, because of your own experiences, you could be triggered, and that person has no knowledge of it. But in those moments, if we live our life saying, okay, well, how am I going to tell this person to stop this so I no longer am triggered? If that's your first step, always, you're going to always feel powerless and at the mercy of other people. And don't get me wrong, if you're in a relationship with someone, if you're in a friendship, if you have close people in your life and you feel like they keep doing something that is hurtful, of course you have the right to communicate. But we can't walk around this earth being entitled to everybody changing while we can't even sit with discomfort and saying no to our own nafs. That's a big problem. So denial, I hope you understood that, like, it's not just I'm in denial of a big problem in my life. It's all the ways that you're denying difficult truths that you need to face. It's all the ways that you're denying yourself the opportunity to grow. The other thing is perfectionism. Perfectionism is a huge barrier to our growth holistically. And the reason why, it's because it's rooted in illusion and it's rooted in shame. Okay. What that means is that a lot of, you know, when people have a problem with perfectionism, is everything okay? Okay. When people have a problem with perfectionism, usually it's an attempt to avoid toxic shame. And I always differentiate between like toxic shame and like the shame that you feel, let's say, like, you know, in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I always say that you can feel something with people that could be toxic, or with yourself it could be toxic, but with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala it's not, right? So I don't like to put everything in one category, it's all bad, because I think humility and shame in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can be a beautiful thing, right? But I'm talking about the toxic shame, which is the kind of shame that's this powerful inner experience that we have when people feel worthless, when people feel like they're not good enough, they're not worthy, right? And so that creates an inner environment that is, you know, how can I say this? It's like, it's a very difficult place to live in. It's like very lacking a lot of peace. Okay, it's not peaceful. It's chaotic. When that happens, it's so powerful that a person tries to avoid it. Shame is one of the most powerful experiences, inner experiences, that people try to constantly avoid, because this is why people are always chasing approval, because they always want to prove that they're worthy, that they're always enough. And so toxic shame could be rooted in trauma, it could be rooted in messages that a person received from their parents that they're not good enough, you know, unless they are perfect. So perfectionism could be a result of many different things. But it can be the very thing that keeps you from growth if that's something you struggle with. Because what it does is that it creates this like all or nothing mentality, where you're either doing everything in a way that you perceive is perfect because you define what perfection is. That's the thing. It's perfectionism. People think it's like there's only one way. No, you actually define what perfect looks like. You define what a perfect person looks like, how you should perfectly look like. You defined what a perfect day looks like. This is why people have this all or nothing mentality with their routines. They're either like, this is what a perfect day looks like. You know, if I wake up, I pray tahajjud, I pray fajr, I go to the gym, I come back, I make me a healthy breakfast, then I go to, like, you know, it's like they write down this perfect blueprint of what a perfect day looks like. And then let's say they have 3 days in a row where they do actually go through that and they follow through on their routine. Then they have one day that they're not like that. They miss tahajjud. Okay. Oh man, this day is off to a horrible start. Right. I see this all the time, and it is a thing, right? You know, it's something that I think that we have to tackle, because many people will throw in the towel and ruin their whole day if they miss one step. They miss one thing, and people do this on their path towards their goals. You know, oh man, I didn't make progress today. Whatever it is that you're trying to improve. And then they think their whole path, they don't see how much they've progressed. They don't see how much effort they put in. They think they start to get hopeless about their future, about their ability to actually achieve that goal when they face like a setback. So perfectionism is really your mind's way of doing whatever it can to avoid you feeling shame. So it creates a very rigidly outlined, detailed view of what you should look like, what your day should look like, whatever it is, right? And so many things. There's like, this is what a perfect, in every category, there's the outline for perfectionism. And so what my life should look like even. Today, many people struggle because they have laid out for themselves what their life should perfectly look like. My life should be like this by a certain age. My life should be like this after, you know, by my second year in college. My life should be like this my senior year of college. My life should be like this when I go to NYU. This is what should happen my freshman year. And then what happens when this doesn't happen? Happens when you graduate. What happens when you hit a certain age? Or what happens when you take that next step? What happens when you do start that career? What happens when you do get married? What happens when you do have kids and things don't look the way that you thought they would look? Then it's like, wait, hold on a minute. Your nafs is uncomfortable now. Life is not looking like we planned, you know? And so the only way to find peace in those moments is to loosen this rigidly defined, outlined plan that you had for yourself. It's to humble this mind and say, I am not the Lord of myself. I am not my own Rabb. I am not my own Lord. I did not create myself. He has a plan that is greater for me. And so this is why sujood is so powerful, because in sujood, we're not just, of course, we're reminded of our utmost humility in front of our Creator and our utmost need for Him, but we're also remembering that our plan is not greater. Our thoughts are not the greatest. We are not the Lord of ourselves. We are always in need. And that my idea of perfectionism is not really what is perfect for me. And that only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can decide that. So one of the greatest ways that keeps people stuck, especially when they hit, because it's easy to keep going when things are good. It's easy to feel hopeful when things are good. Oh, I'm going to progress. I'm going to, when things are moving along and it's happening the way that you want in life. But it's really easy to get stuck and not move forward when you're hit with a setback, or your life starts to look very different than what you had planned for yourself. Then it's hard. And so the more the mind, and I want you to listen to this very carefully, the more the mind creates a very rigid, and the nafs, because the nafs will bully the mind. The nafs doesn't like comfort. Doesn't like discomfort. So it's no, we need to create a very strict plan in a way that I can be comfortable. And so once you face discomfort, the nafs is like, what's going to happen now? When you feel that heavy-heartedness, it's because you're at the mercy of this rigidity that your mind has created. And once you can surrender and say that this may be the perfect plan I created for myself, but this is not my plan. And this is not where I actually am. It doesn't actually match reality. Because remember, I said perfectionism is an illusion. It's not really reality. It's a reality you formed. It's an illusion you formed. And shaitan loves to keep us attached to perfectionism. He loves to keep us attached to perfectionism because shaitan loves to keep us attached to illusion, to things that are not real. Because when you're attached to illusion, you're chasing something that is false. And anything false has nothing to offer you. So you keep chasing it and you deplete your resources. Oh, this is good for me. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to use my mind. I'm going to use my senses. I'm going to use everything Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave me to chase this false reality. So it's an illusion. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran that shaitan promises you, he promises us nothing except delusion. So Allah can promise, but what Allah promises is truthful. But when shaitan promises, it's really a threat. It's not rooted in any truth. It's just to incite fear. So actually, the more you're attached to perfectionism, the more you're at the mercy of shaitan, because he likes you to be attached to your own illusion of what reality should be, rather to where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has actually placed you. And this is why one of the most powerful things we can say to ourselves when we feel like we're faced with a period of our life where we have to come to terms with, wow, this is not where I thought I would be. People are always starting over. I speak to so many people in different ages, different brackets, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we have this universal thing that we all go through, which is we start over in different ways. Meaning that we have to renew our perspective of our life in different ways. Someone could be getting divorced, starting their life over. Never thought they'd be divorced. Never thought now they'd be a single mom or a single dad, right? Losing a spouse or losing a family member. You have to renew. Wow, I never thought I'd be here. I never thought I'd be in this place without this person. I never thought I'd be in this time in my life without this career. People a lot of times think that at this time I should have a career, I should have this, I should have that. Or maybe they did have their career and then at a certain time they lose it. Or maybe they did have wealth and then they lose it. So it's always about, wow, I did not think I would be here. Do you know what's the most powerful thing we can say to ourselves in those moments? I am exactly where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants me to be. In that moment, you're shattering that illusion of perfectionism. You're humbling, you're doing verbal sujud. It's like, I'm submitting. My plan for myself is not greater than Allah's plan for me. My life may not look like what everybody says it should be. Every day, people are faced with pressures, right? Oh, whether by parents or family members. Oh, you're not doing that. Oh, you should be doing this. No, there's this joke in Arab culture where we say like, you go to college, they ask you when you're going to graduate. You graduate when you're going to get married. You get married when you're going to have your first kid. You have your first kid when you're going to have your second, right? So there's this constant pressure, I think, that a lot of people face, especially in certain cultures, where, and in our society today, where are you going to be? What's the next step? What's the next step? Can you, in those moments where you find yourself in a place in your life where it doesn't look like what you think it should be, can you truly surrender to Allah's plan over yours, to Allah's perfection over your idea of perfection? Because we will always be imperfect, but can we take our imperfection to the most perfect? Can we, submit ourselves to Allah's perfection in those moments where we are so attached to our idea of what a perfect life looks like? It's so powerful, and I want you to try it in your own life. Even today, as you're walking out, I am exactly where I need to be. Alhamdulillah. Ya Allah, if this is where I am, it's because there's benefit for me in this phase in my life, or there's benefit for me through this struggle. There's benefit for me in what I'm going through. So the reason perfectionism keeps you from growth and healing and thriving is because if you're attached to that perfect image of what your life should look like and the perfect, just perfect everything, you never actually give yourself an opportunity to open your heart to what I just said, which is opening your heart to the benefit that Allah holds for you in this imperfect human experience. So perfectionism, I think what it does, it closes hearts. It really does. And it makes you live in your mind more, because that's where you formed this idea of what a perfect life looks like, what success looks like. And subhanAllah, I think many times we are harder on ourselves, and people are harder on others. The expectations that people have on of others. People sometimes expect perfection of others. But I think that the more you expect perfection of yourself, the more you're going to expect perfection of others. And I think that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is more merciful to us than we are to others, and than others are to us at times. And than we are to ourselves, because He does not expect perfection from us. He looks to our hearts and our actions. What is the intention? Are you truthful? Are you sincere? So the goal is not perfection, it's authenticity. It's sidq, truthfulness. It's you being connected to haqq, to truth. Ya Allah, I am walking towards you. I am striving towards you. To have truthfulness with Allah. Yeah, this is not where I want to be, but this is where I am. Ya Allah, help me. Because if you deny your truth, Allah still knows about it. Sometimes I work with people who have a hard time admitting where they're at with Allah, because they think it's bad to admit it, or they think it's I'm Allah already knows. I don't have to tawakkul on Allah. Allah already knows you don't have to tawakkul. You might as well face it so that you can work on it. I talked last week about acceptance, how you can't change something you don't accept, which is the opposite of denial, right? You deny something, you can't change it, but you accept something, you actually have the power to change it. So assess where you have set very rigid, perfect expectations of yourself that aren't really God aligned, that aren't really faith aligned, that aren't really because a lot of times our perfectionism is not even akhirah aligned. It's more dunya aligned. This is what perfect success looks in this world. But if you really assess it, this is not what Allah's looking at, you know? So, judging yourself harshly through the ideals of the dunya, basically. This is what, social media says is a perfect, is a perfect man or a perfect woman. And saying, no, what does Allah say is a good man and a good woman? And Allah does say, He tells us what are the characteristics in the Quran of believing men, of believing women, right? Well, we often are more attached to the dunya's perspective of what perfection is, rather than what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's view of who we should be. And so it goes back to what I said in the beginning about the common or the root ingredient that we need to change, which is truth. So as you're working to detach yourself from all of these false expectations of what it means to be perfect, you're going to start rooting yourself in what Allah expects of you. Ya Allah, I've been living my life setting my own expectations for myself without actually assessing if I'm fulfilling your expectations of me. When you actually start prioritizing Allah's expectations of you, Allah becomes your sight, He becomes your hearing, and this is in a hadith, right? Where Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he tells us, that's hadith Qudsi, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that His servant will draw closer to Him through doing the deeds that He has commanded him to do, basically fulfilling Allah's expectation of him. Then Allah will draw near to this servant. He becomes his sight, He becomes his hearing. What does that mean? It means now the more you prioritize Allah, Allah allows you to see what you need to see, He guides you to hear what you need to hear. He guides your path. He allows you to see what is necessary and what is not necessary. And through that, you actually start to redefine what success looks like. But now, not according to your own perfectionism, which could be nafs-centered, ego-centered. Now you're actually defining your life through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let's see here. I have time for... What time do you guys pray Maghrib here? 7:10? 7:10. Okay. I know last time I didn't leave much time for Q&A, so I'll stop here and open it up to Q&A, inshallah, so we can have more time. Yeah. Striving to be perfect? Instead of thinking you're perfect? Can you elaborate?
Well, you were talking about perfection.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Should we try to be perfect or try to improve ourselves?
Yeah, I mean, we'll never be perfect, but I think like ihsan, right? We should always strive for ihsan. What is ihsan? It's excellence. And sometimes it is translated as perfection, but I like to use the word excellence because I don't think we'll ever be perfect, right? And I think that, ihsan, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for example, at the end of every prayer, Allahumma aini ala dhikrika wa shukrika wa husna ibadatak, right? That, oh Allah, I ask you to help me with, being grateful to you, aini ala dhikrika, remembering you, being grateful to you, and the translation is different, excelling in my worship of you or perfecting my worship of you, right? So I think that yes, we should strive for excellence, meaning that, and this is something that the Prophet ﷺ taught us to have, is itqan, right? Where you, like, when you do something, you try to perfect it, meaning that, but is it really perfect? Sometimes we say that, like, perfect something or do it. It's not that you're going to actually do it perfect. It's that you want to feel like you did your best. You really gave it your all. You really tried your best to be comprehensive in your approach towards something. And I think that's another word we can use. Did you comprehensively, like, give your best effort? And so, yeah, we should strive for ihsan. We should strive for excellence. But to expect perfection in unrealistic ways is what is unhealthy, right? And I think also just on the spiritual path, and many people make this mistake, I think the ego can attach to spiritual perfection. So the ego can attach, the nafs could also attach to things that look good, but not necessarily, it actually harms the person spiritually. For For example, and we see this in the Muslim community, right? Like people will start practicing or they'll convert and they're attached to this very perfect, very rigid image of what a perfect Muslim is. And it backfires a lot of times because our deen is about balance. And a lot of times the nafs attaches to the perfect image rather than actually internal excellence. So we have to be careful. Where is your perfection rooted in? Is it rooted in outward image? Because that's what's going to make you feel. The more spiritual you look, or the more you match this perfect image of what it means to be a practicing Muslim man or a practicing Muslim woman, you know, it's assessing these things. It can be a bit complex. That's why I think we have to always assess ourselves. What is our intention? You know, being honest with ourselves. And we know this through our reactions to things. Like when you do something and you don't get the reaction that you had intended or you wanted, that's how you know, okay, maybe my nafs is attached to like more my image or more, you know what I mean, more not actually the internal experience. So I know it's like this question I could go on and on because there's so many different layers to it. So I think to summarize, I think strive for excellence and strive to give something your best, but just know that perfectionism is an attribute. Perfection is only an attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes.
So like this idea of like surrendering to this idea that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants it, you know, like you were exactly where Allah wants you.
Yeah.
So like when you were trying to surrender, like how do you get over the fear and the anxiety of the future that, you know, you'll be stuck in this cycle of negativity forever and that, you know, like that kind of gets in the way. So fear and anxiety of the future that, you know, things won't get better, you know. How do you get over that? How do you learn to surrender?
How do you learn, just to reframe your question, how do you learn to surrender when the anxiety or fears about the future are so powerful?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. I think that if you are struggling with anxiety and a lot of fears about what your future holds for you, I think it will be challenging in the beginning, and to expect that and to say, you know what, I do struggle with fears about the future. I do struggle with that. And Ya Allah, please help me with that. First, to start channeling that through dua and to say, Ya Allah, I am scared and I am fearful and I'm ridden with fears about all the things that could happen to me. And a lot of people are in this world, right? Because what happens within a minute of being on your phone, you've absorbed all the possible harms of that could happen in the world. Parents are more scared than ever because within the constantly, oh, this, be careful, this might happen to your child, this might happen to your child, your child could choke on this, your child could choke. It's like, it's too much. I do not believe we are, and I'm gonna get to your question. I'm just making a longer segue here. I do not believe we were meant to absorb this much negative information. I've been saying this for years. I do not believe our brains were programmed to know this much negativity at once. It's really created a very extreme level of hypervigilance. I do not think we were meant to know about every possible harm. Make sure you know, of course, do your best, but it's like, it's too much. I mean, every day I learn about something new I have to be careful of. And this is why I don't like, you know, I really monitor how much of the news I watch. And, you know, years ago I used to, because I'm very sensitive to like emotions and pains, the pains of others. I realize that about myself. And so I will feel if I see someone in pain, like I will sit with that feeling all day. And I realize, oh my gosh, I'm not meant to absorb this much, you know, so I had to be careful how much I'm absorbing. So that's also part of it too. You know, part of it is monitoring how much negative information that you're absorbing, to take preventative measures, to also not let your fears grow more than they need to be, right? So if you are already struggling with excessive fears, don't make it worse. If social media is creating more fear for you, disconnect. If watching the news every day is creating more fear for you, disconnect. But in the beginning, it's going to be a little hard. So can you take that to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Because everybody's psychology is different. Everybody's background is different. Everybody's struggles are different. Can you say, Ya Allah, this is my struggle? And for one person, it might be tawakkul, right? For another person, it might be being present with Allah. For another person, everybody has their area that they need to grow in. when it comes to tawakkul, the only way that you can have greater trust in Allah is by knowing who He is. Because you cannot trust someone you don't know. And this is one of the main reasons why people struggle with having tawakkul, is because they do not know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Would you give someone your bag, without, or like tell them to hold your purse if you don't know them? And this is just your purse. So of course, you are going to have a hard time surrendering your whole idea for your life, your whole, all your fears, all your hopes, everything, into, giving it to Allah if you don't know Him. And part of this journey too is giving things a try and seeing what happens, taking that leap of faith. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I am what my servant thinks of me. He will be what you think of him. If there is anything that, summarizes positive thinking, it is this statement. You want to know what positive thinking is? It is this. I am what my servant thinks of me. So if you struggle with tawakkul, I want you to sit with something that you feel like you want in your life. And I want you to meditate on this and reflect on this after every prayer. Ya Allah, I know you will come through for me. I know you will. Even if you don't believe it, I want you to do it. I encourage you to do it. Because part of it is training yourself, building the muscle of letting these beliefs set in. Ya Allah, I know you'll come through for me. You said, I am what my servant thinks of me, and what you say is true. Even if you don't believe it. Even if you're shaky as you're saying it. Today you might be shaky. Tomorrow it's going to get a little stronger. So, yeah. Any other thoughts? Yeah, questions?
I think you answered a part of my question, but maybe you have other thoughts about it.
Mm-hmm.
So for instance, you are in a denial situation.
Okay.
And you don't have a plan B. You struggle with tawakkul, as you said. So for instance, what could be like the practical steps to take in order to face, or the question is you ask yourself to notice that you are in a denial situation.
So how can you come to terms with accepting like plan B if all you saw was like plan A for yourself, or?
Yeah. First, to know that you are you are denying this situation. So first, you have to know that you're really denying this situation,
Mm-hmm.
and what to do in order, if you don't have a plan B, like what kind of things that you could do within your faith or within yourself in order to change things.
Okay. I'm trying to, for me, the way that I can answer questions, if I make sure I fully like understand. So you're saying that like if you have a plan A for yourself and you don't have a plan B, how can you have tawakkul in those moments? Or like how can you trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in those moments? Am I understanding you correctly?
Yes.
You sure? Okay. Okay. Yeah, so I think that there's nothing wrong with having great plans and believing that you're dealing with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and saying that I know that that I'm going to achieve this because I am dealing with Allah and that He's going to help me, right? But if your plan is so rigid and you have like, because when we do istikhara, okay, let me stop here.
حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
I'm gonna just answer this question, then we'll wrap it up. So I think that, you know, you made me think of when you were asking this, you know, how they say like the people who, let's say they're falling from somewhere, like they're falling off a cliff or something, and they say that the people who lock their joints, like they lock their, I don't know how do you say it, but they lock their joints, right? They become really stiff when they're falling. They're more likely to get hurt rather than someone who like loosens their joints and isn't as stiff. When they fall, the fall doesn't break them as much, right? I think there's something to take from this when it comes to planning, is that, you know, I'm gonna plan in Allah. I'm gonna plan, but I'm not going to fall. It doesn't break me as much, number one, but I'm also trusting that Allah's gonna catch me, that His plan for me is better, that where I fall is where I need to be. And so that's the whole point of istikhara, is that we are trusting that Allah's plan for us is better. And I think the only way that you can really surrender to that is that you have to imagine, I think this is actually a great technique. It's to imagine the worst case scenario in a situation and to train yourself to say, I'm going to be okay with it, Ya Allah, if that's what you choose for me. But, Ya Allah, I have so much hope in your mercy. I have so much hope in what you have to offer me. You know, and we see this in the story of Prophet Ayub, alayhi salam, right? He suffered so much, and he couldn't even come. He suffered for many years in so many ways, and he couldn't even come to get himself to ask Allah to remove his struggle. So in the end, what he did say is, "Masani dur anta arhamar rahimin," like that, like, or affliction has touched me, or harm has touched me, but you are the most merciful, you know. And we see this example in the prophets where they're trusting in several of the du'as of other prophets as well. I think there's also the du'a of Ta'if by Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's this like acceptance of what Allah chooses for you, but your trust in Him being so merciful with you, that no matter what He chooses, He has your back. And it might not look like what you wanted, but it's going to be still good for you. And so whenever you find yourself anxious, what if my plan A doesn't work? What if this doesn't work? What if this doesn't work? Imagine your worst case scenario, or what's the other option that might not work or might happen that you're afraid of? What is something that you fear might happen if plan A doesn't work? And then train yourself to say, Ya Allah, I'm okay with it. If that's what you choose for me, I'll be okay. I know you will have my back. I know you will take care of me. But Ya Allah, you are the most merciful. Please do not put me through that, you know, and just like trust in his mercy, you know. Okay. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in.